Now, 4 districts in the German capital are now described as high-risk coronavirus zones as concerns soar not only in Germany but across Europe. The coronavirus numbers continue to increase, and yet the colder months of the year are gradually approaching. So how are authorities explaining this, what is happening? Thomas Sparrow is political correspondent with our partners DW, and we cross over to him in Germany for more. Thomas, good afternoon to you. Now, which are the districts being described as high-risk zones for coronavirus right now?
We're talking about several districts here in the capital, Berlin, in particular some of the districts that are most well known among tourists, among foreign visitors as well. And those districts have now become, or at least they're being described as high-risk zones according to how the German government and German authorities describe these high-risk zones. In other words, they are beyond the limit where measures have to be taken in order to reduce that number. In particular, as I say, we're talking about regions that are well known among tourists, and that include some of the most important tourist sites here in the German capital, or at least also where people go out at night. And this is one particular concern that authorities have here in the German capital: nightlife. That's why, for example, among the measures that have been taken by local politicians here in Berlin, we're talking about a night curfew between 11 p.m. and 6 a.m. and between those hours people will also not be able to meet, for example, in parks. So there are also contact restrictions. This is to reduce the chances of people getting infected with the coronavirus, because Berlin has become one of the flashpoints, one of the hotspots, if you will, of coronavirus in Germany, and that is something that clearly worries authorities. It's also, however, important to stress that it's not only Berlin. Other big German cities have also been particularly affected. There are areas of concern, as I already mentioned, one, nightlife. The other one is people returning from high-risk zones, in other words, travelers. That is something that for a long time now has been of concern to German authorities. And a third issue, people who are flouting some of the coronavirus restrictions, whether they're not wearing their masks or maintaining social distancing. And that's why there have been a lot of fines also imposed in Germany's biggest cities.
It's interesting that you mentioned fines. So they established the reasons why the numbers are going up, the behavior of the people. But we know that the authorities are also punishing people. And through this, they've actually generated some 3 million euros.
That's correct. That's quite a lot of money. We're talking here about 35,000 separate fines in Germany's 7 biggest cities. And this has been a very debated issue here in this country at the beginning. You may remember we even spoke about this on our program. They were very reluctant to impose fines, asking people voluntarily to wear masks, voluntarily to maintain distancing and keep those hygiene measures that are so important. But it came to the point where they had to agree on a minimum fine. The minimum fine is 50 euros, for example, for people who don't wear their masks on public transport, although in some regions there has also been debate and they have been saying, well, this is not necessarily what is most effective when it comes to fighting against the coronavirus. But we're talking about measures that have been taken also, for example, to prevent people from writing fake names. If you go here to a restaurant or if you go to a bar, you have to write down your name and address and telephone. This is because of contact tracing purposes. In other words, if someone is infected in that bar or that restaurant, they can identify who was actually with that person at a specific time. But if someone writes down Mickey Mouse or Donald Duck, and we've seen actually that from happening, then you have problems with contact tracing. And that's why authorities also agreed to fine people who specifically mention fake names when they go to a bar or they go to a restaurant.
Very interesting how coronavirus is panning out in Germany. But 3 million is still a lot of money, when money is what's needed, part of what's needed to deal with this virus. But let's talk about the updates on the vaccine. Has Germany made any strides in that regard?
You know that, Gifty, that there's a big struggle not only here in Germany but in other parts of the world to try and find a vaccine as quickly and as safely as possible. That has a very important reason, namely that until there is a vaccine, people will still have to wear their masks and they will still have to maintain social distancing and they will still have to ventilate, especially now in the colder months, and they will still have to, for example, here in Germany, keep that tracing app which the government has asked people to download. So until there is a vaccine, people will still have to be extremely careful. Even after there is a vaccine, I do imagine people will have to remain very careful when it comes to possible infections. And as such, there are different companies around the world that have been trying to find that vaccine as quickly as possible. There is one German company among those trying to find a vaccine. It's called BioNTech, and it has been working hand in hand with giant Pfizer. And as such, something that they did do in recent days was present their vaccine proposal to EU regulators. And this is particularly important, a particularly important step when it comes to trying to find out whether that vaccine can then eventually be used in Germany, but also in Europe. And this has been described as a second such vaccine to be presented to EU regulators, as well as another one by AstraZeneca and the University of Oxford. So this gives you just an idea of how important this has been. It's not only about those issues that we've been discussing, whether it's fining people who flout the rules or making sure that people fulfill all those requirements, or talking to people for them to wear their mask. It's also about this scientific development that's going hand in hand, and there is a big question as to when exactly that vaccine will be able to be in the market and who could then benefit from that vaccine. Those are very important questions that we're obviously following very closely.
Certainly, we'll be here to get more on that. Here in Ghana, we have not recorded, as many numbers as has been recorded in Europe, but we certainly keep wearing our masks. This is good lessons for us, but indeed, how authorities can even make money off people who are being recalcitrant. Thomas, thank you so much for that update from Germany. Thomas Sparrow is political correspondent with our partners DW, and he's been following up on this issue of coronavirus in today's crossover to that country.